What's up, fam? How you guys doing today? So as people join in, I want to let everybody know that we're going to have Steven Pressfield, author of The War at Art and his new book, Man at Arms. He's going to be joining us here in a moment. And also want to let anybody know that today I released a podcast with Dr. Nicole lapera. So you can check that out. And yeah, everything is going good. So let's get the man on the call here. He should be jumping in.
Hey, there we are.
What's going on? How are you,
Hi,
brother?
Aub. How you doing?
I'm
Can you
doing
hear me
really
okay?
good. Yeah, man, everything is good.
All right. How
Everything
are
is,
things in Austin, by the way, after all of the storms and everything you guys had?
well, plumbers are doing great. I'll tell you that. You know, they are doing better than they ever have been. It was interesting, a lot of chaos for a little while, but Texas is pretty resilient. People are pretty resilient, and we're doing good.
Okay, good. Glad to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about this new book that you have, because you're pretty excited about this book. This one I can feel your energy, and I feel like it's meaningful to you.
Yeah, this one is definitely like a personal one for me. Not that they aren't all personal, but this one is particularly personal. It's something a story I've been trying to get out of me for like 13 years and finally did it. So yeah, it is a personal one.
Yeah, and for someone to listen to you, who has talked at length about resistance, to say that you've been trying to get it out of you, for a long time, that's a powerful statement in and of itself. Because one might assume that the mighty Steven Pressfield, if he wants to get something out of him, it just slides right out like you're coming down a water slide.
Yeah, not true, not true at all. I mean, it's just as hard for me as it is for anybody else. And this this one, I think, sometimes you do have to wait on the muse a little bit, and the goddess will come around eventually, you hope, but you can't rush it. And I think that was it more than resistance. It wasn't that I couldn't face it. It was I just I couldn't find the story. But finally I did. Anyway.
Yeah. And so this character, the reason why this story has been out there is this character has appeared in some of your other books and has been a really interesting and pivotal character, but now he gets his own tale.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And by the way, thanks very much for having me on here. Thanks for
Of course, brother.
helping me
Of
with this
course.
platform that you have, and I always feel a little weird about hyping my own stuff, but I'll try to do the best I can here. But
Well,
yeah,
I'll hype it for you because it's fucking awesome.
but the character of Telamon of Arcadia, the central character of this book, who's sort of like the one man killing machine of the ancient world, kind of like a samurai, a lone samurai, or Clint Eastwood in one of those spaghetti westerns or something, has been in three other books of mine, always as a minor character.
Hmm.
And people have responded and said, we want to have a book entirely about him. And I've wanted it too, because I'm kind of fascinated by this guy. And so that was what took me so long to come up with the idea. I thought, what circumstance should I put him in where he could really kind of do his thing and reveal who he is? And that took a long time for it to come to me.
Did you look at modern references of this when you were trying to figure out what makes that elite operator, that person? Because we have these modern references, perhaps a man like Tim Kennedy or some of these other high level operators, these Navy SEALs or Delta Force, Rangers, different individuals who have been called to battle, to war in these interesting ways, and what the psychological traits and qualities are in modern times to kind of give you insight into this man from the ancient times.
Actually, I didn't. In fact, it never even occurred to me to do that. I mean, the sources that I would use are like Western movies or like samurai movies, because
Hmm.
this character, when he's called to do his thing, is totally alone. It is like a samurai being sent on a mission, or a gunslinger being sent on a mission. And but in any event, I really felt like I sort of understood him,
Hmm.
intuitively. And if someone had suggested that to me, Ob, I would have said no, because I think it would kind of confuse me. It would
Sure,
be putting too much stuff in my head.
sure. There's there's something, and I think, I'm not sure if you write about it or if I've heard about it from other writers. Certainly, I've been reading a lot of Jordan Peterson lately because I have a podcast with him today, and he's talking about all these stories, and there's layers and layers of even these ancient stories that are, it appears that people are writing beyond even what their own knowledge might be. Like what they're writing is greater than what they actually are consciously aware of by a considerable margin. And I do, now I can recall you talking about that. Is that how you feel when you get into one of these characters? Like you're writing something that's beyond even what you know?
Definitely. And it sort of was a major, where this first happened with me. I think this is what we talked about before, Rob, was when writing The Legend of Bagger Vance, a book. And the book is narrated by this doctor, this 75-year-old doctor, recalling something that happened to him when he was 10 years old. And as I was writing this, I was like 50 years old or something like that. And I thought, how can I write this character who is smarter than I am, number one, and whose life experience is way beyond mine? And I really was worried how, but as soon as I started to do it, this is the magic of fiction. It just happened. It just flowed. And I was able to do it. And another book of mine, The Virtues of War, is in the first person, narrated by Alexander the Great. Now, how much balls does it take to put yourself in that head and try to speak in that voice? But the amazing thing about fiction, about inspiration, about imagination, is you can do it. Look at somebody like Scott Fitzgerald writing what he did when he was so young,
Mm.
or even Bob Dylan, the songs that he was writing when he was like 19 years old. I mean, how does he do it? It just comes from a deeper source, and that's kind of the mystery and the magic of the whole thing.
Yeah, it really points to this real understanding that we're part of a collective consciousness. And if we just get out of the way, that collective information that every single person has gathered since the beginning of time is always available to us. When we can get our own limited cognition and rational mind out of the way and just surrender to that mystery, as you say, then we can download and access these lessons from the actual Telemon of Arcadia or his corollary in ancient times.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you are definitely in your life into this whole concept of tapping into deeper sources, getting into the, way, way, way deep into,
Yeah.
collective unconscious and whatever is brought up, sensory deprivation chambers and all the other things that you're doing. And I think that really an artist, particularly a writer, does the exact same thing but just sitting at a keyboard. It's that sort of the skill, I think, of that the writer learns over time, is to get the ego out of the way and let whatever is going to come through you come through from whatever that source is. And you definitely are in that source, and I know you are, and you very much respect it,
Yeah.
and you want to tread very lightly and not take it for granted and not assume that you can control it in any way. I mean, being egoless is kind of the goal in a case like that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost giving your characters the honor of having a life of their own. It's like doing
Yes,
them the service and the honor that they get to write their story, in a certain way, by you're taking a back seat to their story. And
which
that's
they
kind
do.
of a beautiful thing. It's just it's doing them the honor of a life.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking somebody was talking to me about the characters that Dickens wrote. And if you think about it, he has like an entire universe of amazing characters, whether it's David Copperfield or Pip or Magwitch or any of those things. And how does that exist within one guy's head? But it does, and it does for anybody that's a writer over a long period of time or an artist of any kind, a songwriter. Think of all the things Bob Dylan, all the characters Bob Dylan has put out there. So it
Hmm.
is true. I don't want to get too airy-fairy as we're talking about this, but it is true. There is another level that can be accessed.
Yeah. If someone here who's listening is a writer, and it seems daunting. It seems daunting to write fiction in particular. Maybe that's because I'm a nonfiction writer primarily. That's where I've been published. I've had my forays into fiction, and I think I'll go back to it at some point. But it seems particularly daunting to write fiction, and just how you get that story out. How do you get, how do you get eyeballs on it in this day and age where everything seems to be driven by platforms and driven by, what you can actually, what eyeballs you can call to your work.
Yeah, it's been a total change in the world. And I'm like, for this book, I did a book just immediately before this, a novel called 36 Righteous Men. Came out about 2 years ago and just sank without a trace, and so for this book, A Man at Arms, I've really kind of committed with Diana, who's right in front of me here, my girlfriend, that we were going to get ourselves out there. One way or another, we were going to, establish a presence and do something. And it's really been, you know, out of my comfort zone completely. But it's been, an education. Let me put it that way. But it
Yeah.
is true. These days, you just have to have some kind of platform. You have to get yourself out there. I think when this book is done, the time, I will have spent as much time promoting it as writing it. And that's a whole different world.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, that makes perfect sense. For Hollywood, that makes perfect sense. They always say that your ad budget is equal to your production budget. That's just the general rule of thumb. And that amount of energy is necessary to get something off the ground and going. But for, a writer like yourself, exploring this new world, this new territory, it's it's just a different thing. We're in a
It's
different
daunting.
landscape.
Well, the one thing I sort of was thinking about, I was thinking about Hemingway and saying to myself, well, he never had to do any of this kind of stuff with social media. But on the other hand, if you think about it, he was a tremendous self-promoter. And it was in those days, it was Life magazine or Collier's or publishing short stories in these glossy magazines. So he was a big self-promoter too. And I think when you think of a lot of the people that we just think are great artists, they also get themselves out there. Toni Morrison was on all kinds of shows, and Philip Roth was on all sorts of media. So I guess it's just part of the game. Like you
Yeah.
say, the ad budget is the same as the production budget.
So, my advice would be for anybody out there, whatever your art is, and I've seen this done really successfully, especially with poets, because poetry is a big calling of mine, and the poets that are able to publish books of poetry that actually make a big splash, they're constantly leaking out. Someone like Atticus, constantly leaking out small little snippets of their poetry at all times, building their audience brick by brick through all of the different social media channels, just little drips and drips and drips, similar to what a nonfiction author would do by conditioning their audience to be ready to receive their thing, but conditioning people with their art. Same with artists. A lot of the painters that I know, I'm a collector of an artist named Hannah Yata. I encourage everybody to look her up, Hannah, Yata. But she publishes little details and little images of the art that she produces, and she gets it out, and then she has a social media following, and then from that following she can just announce on her following when she has a new piece available, and 10 collectors or a new collector will jump on and start to witness it. And it's just, instead of resisting against these times, I would just encourage everybody who's starting out there, just go with it, go with the flow, use the tides that are available to you.
I mean, the one thing I found to kind of second what you're saying, Ob, is that a lot of the people that we become involved with, we actually become friends with, and you actually have a relationship with. And like when I look at now, sometimes like the reviews of the book that are on various platforms, it's like I know everybody.
Mm,
I actually, I've traded emails with them. We've had all kinds of interactions with people. So it does become, you actually make friends. I
yeah.
mean, you and me. I mean, part of the reason that we're doing this thing is that we met up the hill from my house. We've been in touch for years, and we've
Yep.
made it, effort to kind of create a little bond here. And so that's a great thing.
That's one of my favorite things about the podcast as well. Like every time I do a podcast, it's an opportunity to make a friend. And that's because even when you go out to lunch with somebody, it can be a great lunch, but you'll never get a more dedicated conversation than when you have microphones and cameras in front of you, and at least 100,000 people are going to be watching. At that point, nobody is thinking about anything else. Attention, which is that prize that we
Yeah.
all seek, which actually enriches everything, in presence. that just drops in. And so spending an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours of attention and presence with somebody, it really creates an interesting bond. And some of those will last, and some of those, will just be that immediate moment, and, you'll carry on. But it is really cool. And even, we've done this a couple times now. And every time we do, our relationship grows, along with those lunches and little meetups that we'll have. But it is great to start using these platforms to actually build your tribe, people you can really
Yeah,
find
yeah.
resonance with.
And particularly on a podcast, if you're the one who's the podcaster, you've got to do a lot of research
Yeah.
about the person that you're bringing on, and curiosity. You're bringing curiosity, not just you, but anyone that's doing this on. And for the person that's the guest or that's on, it's a great compliment that the person who's interviewing has actually taken the time to read some of their stuff or think about what their worldview is, and try to ask them and try to dig deep. What was your childhood like, or how did you evolve to this thing? It is a great thing, and I've become a fan of podcasting. I used to say no, as you know, to everything, because I thought I'm a writer. I want to work. I don't want to be out there, talking about myself or anything like that. But the interesting thing is you make such friends, and the whole sort of ecosystem of podcasts that are out there, it has, to me, almost replaced news in a way, in a better way, because somebody like you or like Rich Roll or Tim Ferriss or whatever will get someone on there like, say, Laird Hamilton or David Goggins or something like that, and really get into deep stories about them. And if you're watching that, and you're struggling, have your own struggles in your own life, I mean, it's so great to hear, how Laird Hamilton deals with fear. So where would you ever get that in any other way? It would never be on the news. You're never going to meet Laird Hamilton. So it's a wonderful thing, and it's free.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the beauty of the time we're in. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to take a couple questions from people here. So if anybody wants
Okay.
to jump in with some questions, we'll go there. How long does it take for you to recycle after you've just pushed this book out? I'm sure it was finished a little earlier so you could get it all published. And how long does it take for you to recycle, reset, and jump into another project? Are you kind of back to back, or do you take a moment?
That's a great question. I'm a big believer that if you're writing book 7, you should already be into book 8. And by the time you finish one book, I always like to have like 90 pages of the next one,
Wow.
even in really rough form, done. So I already sort of had the next one on its way. Then I had to kind of put that aside because of all the promotion I've been doing. And I feel kind of guilty about that, because I have not really been hammering the way I should. And so I will have to plunge back in another month or so, and but what is really helpful, like I say, is I've already got a huge part of the next one already done. So, or at least a rough draft of what it's done. But I
Yeah.
would I would say to any writer that's listening to this, or any artist, don't stop when you finish a certain work. Don't stop and like wait for the response to come in, because that's like Seth Godin calls that the dip, right? And you go into that hole, you can never come out of it. Start right away. If you finish a book on Tuesday, start the next book on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And as far as taking a break, then I'm also a believer that once you get a little momentum going, once you get the first 50, 60 pages going, then you can take a break, then go on vacation.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
least you've got something you can build on.
Yeah. There was some advice that I read that, and I always confuse the sources of this advice, but someone was talking about, I think it might have been Stephen Kotler, but someone was talking about how there was a big author who recommended that you quit writing while you're still excited about what you're writing for the day, right? Because that's going to
Ah,
draw you into the next day,
ah,
so you don't completely exhaust yourself till you've, purged the last word out of your psyche and you just collapse in exhaustion at the end. He recommended that you write, and when you're still excited about what you're writing, that's when you close the work for the session for the day, because you're going to wake up and you let that momentum, that excitement carry you into the next day and into the next day.
I would agree with that completely. I do that exact thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Hemingway used to say that you shouldn't stop until you know what's going to happen the next day. What's the next
Yeah.
scene that's coming along? And John Steinbeck used to say, always leave a little. What do you say? Let the well fill up overnight. You know,
Yeah.
don't drain yourself completely. Stop while you still have a little momentum going. So I agree with that completely. It makes
Yeah.
perfect
Yeah.
sense.
It does, and it's not something that I ever did. So I'm like really happy to get that
Ah,
advice because I drain the well completely till I'm just prostrate on the ground, completely out of the waters of creativity. But that is really good advice. All right, we got some questions coming in. This question from Mile High Sports Cairo: can you speak to the concept of fortune favoring the bold?
ah, I wish I knew exactly what the context of that is, but I certainly, um, actually, I was on Tim Ferriss's podcast the other day, and he was talking about himself writing fiction, which he was kind of afraid to do. And I could see he had big, big resistance to it. And one of the things that I said to him was, don't start with something small. Don't be a pussy. Don't say to yourself, oh, let me just write a little short story and I'll get it out. I said, do something bold. And the reason I said that is because the muse appreciates courage.
Mm,
She admires us when we take a real swing for the seats. And I think it's liberating too. It's like being aggressive is better than, being on the offense is better than being on defense. Now, when I said something big, I don't mean it has to be like 800 pages long, but just something that's got some balls to it, something that
hmm.
scares you, something
Yeah.
something big. So, I do think that it is a law of nature that fortune does favor the bold. I mean, that comes from a proverb, a Roman proverb, right? They knew what they were talking about. That
Hmm.
an aggressive action somehow calls upon something in nature or in, I don't know what you would call it, but the gods come in on your side when you take a bold stance.
From a biological materialist reductionist standpoint too, this is one of the flow state triggers. laird
Is
hamilton
it?
riding
Ah.
laird hamilton riding a 8-foot wave, which is no fucking big deal for him. He's not going to be in flow state, but for me, riding an 8-foot wave when I'm good with about a 2-footer or a 3-footer, that'll trigger it. So it's relative. So big for Laird is 110-foot jaws swell, right? And then he's for damn sure going to be in flow, which is going to activate all of the neurochemicals that are going to help him operate in the
Ah,
best way.
I
So there
never
are
thought
some
about
even
that. I
some
buy
other
it.
physiological reasons to do that, to take that thing that scares you a little bit, because it's actually going to bring out your very best when you do it. So yeah, I mean, and I think that's probably only one of the ways to look at that maximum of fortune favors the bold. So well said, well said. All right. So this is for someone, Rich Ehlers, who has a hard time getting started. He's not a writer, but when he has any project or anything that he's trying to endeavor on, I'm supposing he has a hard time just starting. What's your advice for someone who has a hard time starting?
I have an axiom that I believe in, which is start before you're ready. And I think a lot of times when we're on the brink of something, at the inception of something, we always have to be wary of resistance with a capital R. And resistance is going to try to stop us before we even begin. And like one of the ways that it does that is it'll say, well, I'm not ready. I need to do a little more research. Or I'm not ready. I need to talk and get a little more backing from so and so forth. And that is the devil trying to defeat us, and the devil will defeat us. So I think it's always a great thing to, even before you know what you're going to do, just start. Just put something on paper. Just start with it. Start with an idea. And like you say, this is again, fortune favors the bold. It's the same sort of thing. It'll kick into a kind of a flow state, I think, immediately. And the other thing is, don't stop. If you start on day one, don't say, "Oh shit, I'm tired. I'm not going to." Hit day two, day three, day four, day five, and get some real momentum going. And I even follow that when I'm in the middle of a project and maybe I've been writing for 120 days and I'm on day 121. when I sit down to the keyboard, I want to start like in second one, microsecond one. I want to start writing something. Just
Hmm.
pick up the sentence from the thing before. Because if you start thinking about it, if you start going to yourself, oh shit, what comes next? Do I have to do this or that or the other? Next thing you know, you're going to be paralyzed.
Hmm.
Whereas if you jump in the flow, even if you're wrong for the first 10 minutes and you have to cut it all, at least you're in the flow and you're moving.
Yeah.
So just force yourself. This is to our question answer here. Force yourself to start, even if you're not ready. Don't even worry about not being ready. It's like
Yeah.
improv. Just start.
That's great advice. There's a I'm about to do another podcast with a neuroscientist named Andrew Huberman. And in my research, one of the things that he talks about with starting is at the process of starting, you're going to be releasing neurochemicals that make things very uncomfortable. So
Ah,
norepinephrine, noradrenaline, and it's going to make you want to just run out of your seat and just jump and get out of the way and stop. But if you can actually fight your way through that, different neurochemicals kick in. Dopamine starts to kick in. You start to be proud of yourself for enduring those feelings and enduring those challenges as they come up. And then your system starts to get online in a different way and actually drives you toward further action. But every single time, if you're actually hooked up to a monitor that's testing what's going on in your brain, you're going to be coming up against the physical manifestation of resistance until you push through that. And the way to trick yourself, well, not trick yourself, but train yourself, is to say, the longer you sit in that, in that test, in that challenge of those neurochemicals coming, the capital R resistance, which has a physiological marker that Andrew's been able to measure, the longer you sit in that, the more proud you are of yourself and the more that you give yourself credit for enduring that challenge, like you would at going through a hard workout, like you would if you're continuing to run in a marathon. You start to give yourself that positive feedback, which will accelerate the dopamine mechanism, which is the reward chemicals, which will actually help you keep going. So that's some
wow,
other
that's
advice.
interesting.
Just know that it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard when you start, but if you stick with it and you give yourself some encouragement as you stick with it, it's going to get easier.
Oh, that's great. I had no idea there was like a physiological, element to that. I
Yeah.
believe it completely.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We're going to find one last question. Well, this is a pretty good one. Would love some guidance. This is Tamil Wood, T. Yamil Wood. Would love to have some guidance in having to navigate the ordinary world of a toxic day job while trying to heed the call of the daemon.
Ah, well, that's a great question, and certainly that applies to like millions of people, including
Yep.
me. And you know, um, uh, I'm blanking on James Patterson. Is he the famous fiction writer?
Is it David Baldacci?
No, Patterson.
Okay.
I think
Mm-hmm.
I don't know James. I think it's
It sounds
James
right.
Patterson. He was. I think he was the head of J. Walter Thompson ad agency. Big job, right? And he wanted to be a fiction writer, wanted to write novels. And so what he used to do is he would come in at 5 o'clock in the morning, get into his office, lock the door, and for an hour and a half, he would just work on his fiction. And at that time, he opened the door, and then he became the boss of J. Walter Thompson. So in other words, sort of the concept is compartmentalization. There are 24 hours in a day, and it is entirely possible if you can carve out an hour and a half a day and then work a few more hours on the weekend, you can get like 10, 15 hours a week, which is a tremendous amount of time, even with a terrible toxic job. And the other thing about that is when you know that you're following your dream, even if it's only an hour and a half a day or an hour a day, it makes that job a lot more palatable to you. And you can
Yeah.
say, I'm a grown up, I'm a pro, I can do this shit. I can, maybe it's not my dream, but it's better than being in a coal mine. Or even if I'm working in a coal mine, what's wrong with that? I put in my day, shovel 16 tons, and then I come home and I can block out an hour and a half to work. I mean, I think so many writers and artists have done that. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands going back through history. Epictetus was a slave, so it can be done. Compartmentalization is a great make a bit of magic that actually works.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Stephen, you're a legend. This has been great. A Man at Arms. It's available everywhere now, or is it coming
Yeah,
out
it just
still?
came out yesterday, Aub. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I encourage everybody to read it. If a lot of us on this call probably have read some of Stephen's nonfiction, The Artist's Journey, The War of Art, Turning Pro, all of these different works, but his fiction is absolutely stunning. So if you haven't taken a dive into crossing over into his fiction, I really encourage you guys to do that. And I haven't had a chance to read the entire novel, but just diving in, it's absolutely captivating. So keep doing what you're doing, man. You're a gift to this world
You
and a
too,
gift to
Aub.
me, as
Thank you
I've
very
said many
much.
times.
Thanks very much for having me on here. It's great to
Absolutely,
be
brother.
there. All right.
Absolutely.
Till next
We'll,
time.
we'll keep in touch. Yeah. Till next time.
Okay, great. Anytime.
All right. Take care, brother.
All right. Bye for now.